My guest today is Jerry Nixon. Jerry, how are you, my friend?
Hi, David. Thanks for having me back. I love the show. Glad to be on. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Not first-time caller. You were on the show less than a year ago.
Yeah,
I wanted you back because you got some cool things to talk about. What's new these days? What are you working on?
I moved over to the SQL team, and I've been here for about 3 years. We're doing all the focus around the developer, and so it's pretty cool because SQL Server, which is a major piece of the Microsoft story, has always
For a long
focused
time.
a long time. Well, I mean, honestly, it's paid my mortgage for years and years. And I have, it's always focused on the DBA. So if you were a developer, you just kind of figured it out. And there was always some tooling, but never good tooling. And so now there's a new focus inside the SQL team to let the DBA have all the candy they've already got, but let the developer start to have new things to make it so that we can remove the friction and stuff, all the marketing words. But it's totally true. Like, so many neat things have been introduced to make it so it's easier and easier to use it. And today I kind of want to focus on two of them. One is kind of a major enhancement to the MS SQL extension inside Visual Studio Code and Data API Builder for those developers who are thinking about AI in a kind of a practical sense. Data API Builder makes it so that you can kind of just land on it in a really simple way and feel secure about it as well. There's some caveats, and I think it'll be a fun discussion.
Okay, that's two things. Let's start with the SQL extension for VS Code. What's
All right.
cool and new in that?
Well, first, I think to set the stage, Microsoft really, I say Microsoft, but I should say we really confused developers on which tool they were supposed to use. We have SQL Server Management Studio, which runs in Windows. It's the superset of everything that SQL can do. That is still true. Everything is true about that. However, it's not cross-platform, and it also isn't really geared towards some of the things that developers are attracted to. So we also had Azure Data Studio, which is now deprecated, but it was very confusing because it was our cross-platform strategy, but nobody could figure out why it couldn't do everything that MS SQL could do, or everything that SSMS could do. And we never really had a great story around it. Now that we've deprecated it, we've turned all of our attention to Visual Studio Code. The MS SQL extension is still going to be a somewhat subset of SSMS, but it's going to be a Venn diagram, introducing all of the developer tooling there. And so if you want to be able to do something from a developer's point of view, interact with database projects, do all of the container work and stuff like that, you're going to land in VS Code. And the upside to that is developers already like VS Code, so we don't have to invite them to install yet another tool like ADS or something. And it's cross-platform, and it's fast, and all the things like that. So that's kind of setting the stage. So all of the work that went into ADS now is being migrated over so that we can do the same thing inside the VS Code extension, which has received so much love in the last year. That's what I want to show you.
Cool. Yeah, and I think to point out one of the reasons why people like VS Code so much is because of this plug-in architecture, these extensions that you talked about. Is it comes in very, very lightweight. It's not. You were talking off camera about how cumbersome it is sometimes to install something like SQL Server Management Studio or Visual Studio, the full-blown version.
Right. Especially if you're on a Mac.
Yeah, especially if you're on a Mac. Yes, exactly. But even if you're on Windows, it's still they're big and they're heavy and they take a long time to start up. VS Code is lightweight. You install the plugins, the extensions that you need, which is sort of our friends in the open source world have been doing that for years. It took us a few years to figure it out, but VS Code I think embodies that model.
The other thing that people love about VS Code is that it's free.
Frugal folks like myself appreciate that.
Yeah, I teach at a university as well, and so we always use VS Code because it's free and because you never know what a student's going to show up with, a Mac or a Windows device as well. And the fact that it's so lightweight, the way you described it was really perfect. You just add what you need, and all the other stuff doesn't even play a role. It's really nice.
Yeah. Well, let me see this extension, the new tools in the SQL Server extension for Visual Studio Code. Can you show it to us?
Yeah, all right, let me share my screen here. I have it pulled up. I have two things pulled up that are pretty fun. The first one is Visual Studio Code and the extension, and I'll walk you through all of that. But the other one is I also have I have Docker Desktop. So Docker Desktop is installed. there's no extra configuration. So if you are unfamiliar, let's say, with containers, then all you really need to do is install Docker Desktop and you're good to go. That's really
It's
nice.
also free.
And it is also free when you're not using it as part of an enterprise, right? It's a little bit like the community edition of Visual Studio, where it's free for students and hobbyists and individual professionals. But as soon as you get into a team of larger than something, then you start paying a license. I'm not really sure what the Docker license fee is, but I do know there is one because I've heard people grumble about it. So I know it's there. All right, so I have the Visual Studio. I have MS SQL in VS Code. And in fact, let me just pull it up to make sure everybody sees the same thing that we see, right? So if I am MS SQL, it is this one, the MS SQL. I mean, very, very vanilla looking here, but it brings in with it a whole bunch of other extensions that add capabilities that now work together. They used to be isolated functionality, but now all of them are together working. It's really nice. So yeah, it has this little SQL Server tab that you go into, and this is where everything starts. And so probably the coolest thing to start with is just to show how you can create a local container. So you can create a local container by clicking this button or going up to this button. They're exactly the same. And what's nice about it is the assumption is you have minimal knowledge or minimal desire to interact with Docker very much. You just want this to take care of everything. So if I click get started, it goes through and makes sure that everything is installed, running, and set up and ready. And so that's really important because it's an easy mistake to have Docker installed but not have it running, then try and create a container and wonder why it's not working correctly. All right, so I just clicked next after it did the prerequisite check. It is about to deploy SQL for me, not installing it on my local machine, but just installing it inside a Linux container because SQL now runs in Linux. And so when it does that, it's super small and lightweight. It goes and gets the image for you if you haven't already pulled it down. It reuses it if you already have it, so you don't have to worry about bandwidth. And then it just asks the basic questions. So for example, it asks which version of SQL you want. And so you can go 25, 22, 19, and 17. What's not on this is Azure SQL database. And so we're working to create an image for Azure SQL DB as well, so that you can have the identical local behavior that you have when you're up in Azure. The nice thing is, because 2025 is about to be GA'd at the end of the year sometime, it is almost currently identical to Azure SQL DB functionality-wise. And so it kind of solves the problem for now, but sometime next year, we're going to need to introduce an Azure SQL DB container for the same reason, just so a developer knows that what they're doing will actually work in the cloud and they don't have to make some sort of concession. Okay, so it asks what the SA password, since it's installing it, it has to have something. I will add a password, just so you can see here, right? Just a simple password, save it. And the reason I'm saving it is not because it saves it inside the container, but it saves it because it's about to create a connection for me so I can interact with it as a user. And then it asks what the profile is. It can be anything. I'll just say it's local 25. And because I work in SQL, I have SQL installed, I might not want it to conflict with my local version of SQL. So I'll just change the port to 1234 so that it doesn't conflict with the default of 1433. Right? So that's the only difference. If I didn't have SQL installed, I wouldn't even have to think like that. I would just go ahead and install it. But it might be a nice thing for a developer who's watching this to be able to see that this is a nice workaround for a common problem. Okay,
maybe install multiple versions in multiple containers, right? Maybe you want to have one application, one container running one version of SQL.
That's right. And every time you do, you're going to need to pick a different port. They can't share it. They're all localhost something. And so localhost port, special port you create just for that, right? Exactly. And because they're isolated over TCP, you have most of the ports available you can use. And the only one is 1433 if you happen to have SQL installed. So do I need to click on the terms and conditions for us to read through those?
Absolutely. I always read 100% of those terms and conditions before
all right, so I'll go ahead and click create. So the nice thing is I left Docker open on the other side just so you can see everything kind of interoping. And so it has built it for me. It's setting up the container as far as what the password is, making sure that the initial database is installed. Now that's the master database, not an actual database, as well as all the ports. And so that's nice and finished. That's a quick way to have SQL up and running. If I were to repeat this process, pick another version of course, pick another port, I would have another one as well. And right. So that's really cool to be able to just have it sitting there because it's local. It can interact with each other. It's really nice. Okay, so now that I've got it, the one thing, I'm going to go back to this same SQL Server tab, and local 25 now is an automatic connection that I can start interacting with that database. There's no reason to keep showing you Docker. There's nothing flashes over there, right? And so let me just to kind of expand this. So if I right click this and say new query, and I say select at version, and just run it, you can see I'm running 2025 and it's the CTP, and so the preview version. And that's it. I just wanted to kind of show how easy it is now to interact with it and have it so you can have SQL running on your machine in the wink of an eye. And I think a lot of people still are living in, 5-10 years ago when installing SQL was a major thought process of, do I want to do this on my machine? Can I, how do I uninstall it? What services are going to be running? What's the impact on my performance of my machine? All of those questions are pretty much gone because were I to go back into Docker, I could just stop this and go to something else and not worry about any of the cycles on my machine being taken by my development environment, and then just start it again and get right back into where I was. So it's been a nice change getting into the container side of everything for sure.
Looks like I've got some nodes over here on the left here where I can right click and create a database, create tables in that database, and so on. So I don't have all the functionality of SQL Server Management Studio, but I think I probably have some of that.
Let me show you something really.
Is it not right click? Is it all command line driven?
Right now, it's not right click. Soon, everything will be right click. Remember, we're just building it out. So right now, I'll create the database like this, and if I refresh, you'll see Jerry shows up there. There are some right click things I'd like to show you though. One of them is a schema designer. So I can go in. It's a JSON-based schema designer that allows me to see in a DSL language all of the tables and relationships and kind of draw those tables out. I also have a schema compare, which allows me to point to two different databases and be able to see the difference between those databases and build a script to update them between them. So if you have a test database and a production database, you can see the difference between, and then we'll do the work of building the script to keep them all in sync. And then let me do one more. I also have chat with this database, which allows me to open up Copilot with context into the database so it knows all my tables, rows, and objects. So I can ask questions about it's not asking generic questions about what is a database. It's asking specific questions about, tell me about my database, tell me about the tables, tell me about the views, tell me why I even have this cross-reference table, what does it do? Neat stuff like that if you're unfamiliar with, maybe you've been given a database, and can you just explain what this database is supposed to do? It has all of the references as well as the capability to give you back the scripts to make modifications to. And there's a built-in MCP tool that allows it to talk to the schema designer as well. So you can say, let's make some changes to the schema, and it can inject those changes to the schema designer so you can see visually what they look like before you commit them back to the database. So a lot of neat stuff that, it's all in preview, but you can tell where we're going. I mean, it's going to be a neat thing when we have it.
Do we have a timetable as to when it's going to be released?
Yeah, everything is pushing for this year as best as we can. When 2025 is made GA at the end of the year sometime, that's when we want to have this as well. So the team is scrambling to try and get to a point where everything is stable and reliable, and it just really is cool. So that's the idea. The end of 2025, we hope to have everything available. We won't. I can tell you right now, some things aren't going to make it, but most things are because the teams are really dedicated to it.
Love it. Talk a little bit about the deployment story. Once I have this working on my own machine, I want to push it up to someplace like Azure.
I'd say there's two ways to have a deployment story. So working locally for a developer that's still the holy grail, right? You want to work locally, and that's the reason we have this container. Then there's two easy ways to deploy this. I would say there's a third way if we talk about .NET Aspire. The first is to use schema compare against my local SQL server that I'm running against, and pointing it to what's running up in Azure, find the difference and execute that script so that Azure becomes updated. The other is to create a database project. So a database project is different than code first. It's database first, allowing you to have, we call them DDL scripts. They're the data definition language. how to create a table, how to create a view, how to create a stored procedure, all of that in one place and managed like source code inside a Git repository, the way you would want to do it. And then that can be pushed automatically as a publish operation up into Azure. Or I can use, again, schema compare to look at my project. It'll treat it as if it's a database. Look at all the objects up in the cloud, compare the two, and give you an update script against them. So you can publish it directly. You can create a update script directly if that's what you want as well. And then the final one is if you're using .NET Aspire, you can publish inside .NET Aspire. I would say if you want the most command line driven, reliable, and kind of, let's just say, the way that we want to prescribe developers and data engineering teams to do this, it is definitely through creating a project from the database and then working with that database project to publish directly into the next stage, into your UAT, into your, whatever that next stage is along the way, with human intervention that says, I may deploy to my UAT automatically, but I would never deploy to my production. And I would automatically create the script, but then I would give it to somebody who could actually review it and make sure we're doing everything in a way that's sensible. Usually it's just looks good, go on. Sometimes there's some tweaks around it because things could be complex. A demo with 5 tables doesn't reflect the real world enterprise that has hundreds, sometimes even thousands of objects inside their database. So it makes sense to review that script before you execute it. But it's nice that it can all be done inside pre-built actions inside GitHub, or pre-built, what's the action called inside DevOps? I forget. Anyway, pre-built DevOps operations inside the pipeline. What are those called? I forget. But they also exist as well. Yeah, both of them exist. So it really is a smooth story. And you know what I tell developers? I'm like, you would never write a method inside C# and not follow up with a unit test to make sure that it works and you can catch regressions if somebody changes it. You really shouldn't do that for objects inside a database either. And this isn't just a SQL story. This is any database. Because a stored procedure is just a method. It still has input parameters. It still has output values. And sometimes there's state operations being done inside it. You should write unit tests against your database objects in the same way that you run unit tests against your code, because it is code. And you can automate all of that inside your CI/CD pipeline too. So just a little bit of a best practice, not SQL specific. It just should be done inside a database. And
Jerry, this is awesome. I cannot wait to try this tool. Thank you very much.
It's a great tool, and it's just getting better. So remember, everything's in preview, but in the next few months, all of those previews will slide away, and these will be the tools that developers can rely on. Nice. No doubt about it. SQL is some sophisticated technology, and we're doing everything around it to make sure the tooling makes it the best friend for the developer.